Good morning, and hey now, PASW staff, clients, and friends, of course, joining us. Welcome to Wednesday's class. This is a shorter week. We looked at the very cool, famous, iconic blockbuster film Jurassic Park by Spielberg, 1993, and get that to me by today, and we'll see the results for Friday. I'm looking forward to that very much. Today we're going to talk about a composer that I've been meaning to talk about for a long time. He's changed the world. We've talked about him in different classes, and today we'll get to talk about his life, a few huge pieces that changed the world, and mostly we'll just have a lovely time listening to his music, because he's literally one of the most beautiful composers that ever lived. And we'll be looking at the life of Claude Debussy. Debussy, you've heard of. I brought him up when we did the Maurice Ravel class. Remember that class where I said the music sounded like water? Remember this? You know, it just sounded so gorgeous. That's Ravel. Okay, so Debussy's about 12 years before Ravel. They knew each other. I don't think they were friends, but they knew of each other. But they were going around the same time in Paris. And Debussy's kind of the first composer to explore this Impressionism movement going on. Impressionism is that movement where it's kind of based on moods and atmospheres rather than just a perfect picture of something. And if you think of the painters going on, Monet, Cezanne, Pissarro, Renoir, these painters are part of the Impressionism movement going on. And composers like Ravel and Debussy, and somewhat Eric Satie a little bit, but his music's different. His music is kind of like we talked about, background furniture music in a lovely sense, and not in a way. But his music doesn't sound like Debussy and Ravel, even though they liked his music and he liked their music. But with painters and composers, Impressionism is different. Now, Expressionism happens later in the 20th century with Schoenberg, Webern, and kind of more like in the 20s, in the 1920s. First off, we have to be in the right location, right? We can't. I mean, right now we're just floundering right here in my apartment. So let's go from Hawaii, to where they filmed Jurassic Park, and let's go to France. And this is where the Impressionism movement, started. This is where Debussy is born, and he's born in 1862. So what's going on in 1862? Well, in 1861, it's a year before the Civil War happens in the United States. So although this is in Paris, he's studying music in Paris, still a lot of stuff happening in the world that's and if we just look at the 1860s, of the decade that he's born, Lincoln's assassinated in 1865. The first transatlantic cable is successfully done in 1866. This means it's the first time it's possible that there's instant communication between Europe and America. 1866. That's a long time ago, where you could literally, it's like sending a text message or an email today. So that's the first cable goes by. Okay, in literature, what's going on? Victor Hugo, Les Miserables is written. War and Peace by Tolstoy. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll. Great art is going on in the 1860s. So technology, artists, things moving ahead. So this is the decade that Debussy is growing up in, and by the age of 10, he goes to the most famous music conservatory, the conservatory in Paris, and studies music. And by the age of 40, he's reached international fame. In 1902, he's considered a huge composer. Mostly because he developed his own style of harmony, which we'll look at, and orchestration. So here's the thing. So Orchestration is, we know what an orchestra is everybody, all the players together. Orchestrating is writing for all those players. Now, Mozart and Beethoven, people we've talked about, they would orchestrate for the whole orchestra. But people like Debussy and Ravel, they take it to a whole new level. They're literally using coloring in the orchestra. So what do I mean by that? It's not just a violin sound playing a violin line. Now they're looking at what else can you get out of the instrument? Oh, violins can play harmonics. Violins can do this. They're looking at every single instrument and looking at what is this instrument capable of doing beyond just what we normally know. And if so, can we get a new color sound? So it's almost like adding special effects. It's like with regular computers and a regular effect, and then somebody saying, but you can add special effects too. That's kind of probably what it's akin to, like today, where Debussy and Ravel, they knew that a violin could just do more than just doing that. There's different effects that the violin can do. So that's why their orchestration sounds so polished. That's why it sounds like it puts you in a mood, in a hazy daydream, or in a field, or it really puts you in a mood and atmosphere where it's like a dream-like, rather than just a perfect story. And if we look at like something like Alice in Wonderland, isn't that exactly what it is? It's not just a perfect story. It's atmospheric, it's mood-like. So this is what the artist, or whether it's and the same with Monet. I mean, this is what Impressionism is. This is what I like about it. And because of that, Debussy didn't really write symphonies. He didn't really write, he had one opera, but his thing of writing was the same with Ravel. They would write based on poems, based on paintings, still writing music, but not in the traditional way of Symphony No. 1, Symphony No. 2. They didn't do that. They each wrote one string quartet, which is one of the best string quartets ever written, and they only wrote one. But they didn't do conventional music structures. They were more free flowing. So when I said we'd talk about harmony, so the harmony in the Impressionism movement, the music movement is, there's a lot. We'll just take two examples. So usually when you have, and this is stuff that you'll know of because we did talk a little bit about that. C, E, G, if we just take that. So what composers like Debussy and Ravel, what they're going to do is they're going to add sevenths and ninths. So they're going to add C, E, G, B, D. They're going to keep going up and making the chord longer, instead of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven would kind of they would add harmonies, but it would mostly stick. They wouldn't be adding ninths and tenths and twelfths and all that stuff. They wouldn't go that far. Now, we did talk about Bill Evans. Bill Evans was hugely influenced by Debussy, because remember we said that he would have rootless chords, so he wouldn't have the root, but he would play the sevenths, the ninths, the elevenths, the notes above the chord. So they were extending the chord again to get more colors, right? So that's what Debussy was doing. So adding intervals that they just kept going up instead of stopping at the fifth. The other thing is the whole tone scale. So we know what a major scale is. Major scale is that. Whole tone scale is this. Now, so it means it has a whole tone between each note. Okay, so a whole step, not a half step. Half step is this. Whole step is this. So it's a whole step. That's why it's a whole tone scale. Slightly dissonant. We're going to come back to that scale, and we're going to see how that scale changes history forever. So the first piece we're just going to look at is something that I know you know, Clair de Lune. Everybody knows this piece, one of the most beautiful pieces that is ever written. And he began composing it around 1890. So around 28. He was 28 when he did this. He revised it a lot, but by 1905 it was published. And see if you know a little bit of this piece. gorgeous, right? It puts you in the moment of like in the middle of a dream, makes you relax, makes you relax, but also like unsure. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this piece before. It's one of the prettiest pieces ever written. And we also looked at this piece because, do you remember when we talked about Bill Evans, his rootless chords? This was an example that I used, actually. If we look at this, it's D flat, but the D flat is not the root. It's a D flat chord. So he's usually using an inversion. An inversion is where you just respell it. So if it's a D flat chord, D flat, F, A flat, that's the chord. Well, let's say you're not starting with the D flat. You're going to start with the F, the A flat, and the D flat's going to go up there. Or it can be spelled a different way. So this is inversions. Again, the purpose of this is not just flowery language. It's to create different colors, a different color thing. If you do this, then it's going to sound like this. So that's what's interesting about this. Okay, and if we look at his other piece that was composed in 1894, okay, so a little bit after Clair de Lune, and this is the prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, one of the most gorgeous symphonic poems, pieces. This is the piece that changed music history. So listen to just the beginning, and then I'll tell you why. So symphonic poem. So it was based on a poem. Like I said, Debussy wouldn't write traditional, conventional stuff. Now composers are putting music to poems, to images and stuff. So it describes the dreams of a faun, and which is a mythical kind of half human, half goat, in the afternoon of this very hot, heat wave, like kind of what we're going through right now. It's a flute, right? Okay. He changes music history right here. Scholars and people like Pierre Boulez say this is the first modern piece ever written. Why is it modern? Listen to this. This is the interval of a tritone. If you remember, who used the tritone? Do you remember it was the Devil's interval that we talked about? And we talked about that with Leonard Bernstein with West Side Story. Remember, that was his motif, using the tritone with all of those, many of those songs. Cool, Maria, all of those had this song. And that was considered the Devil's, interval in the medieval times, hundreds of years ago. So Debussy's the first composer to really land on this interval in a way that's probably no other composers were doing that, because you didn't mess with this. This sounds like a wrong note. So look at this. This is a C sharp to a G. That is a tritone. That's the interval of an extended fourth. So it's a fourth interval, but it's a raised fourth. Because he goes to G, instead of, you would think, you would just go from C sharp down to F sharp. You would go a fifth down, right? or you'd go C sharp down to G, you'd go a fourth down. That's usually normally how music was written back then. Now, he's going to G natural. He's going to a tritone. He's going to something where it sounds wrong. This interval in the beginning of the piece is going to change all of 20th century music. And he's doing it right now in 1894, 6 years before the 20th century happens. This, just moving one note, is going to change the rest of music history, because now composers are going to be listening to this and saying, now if he's doing that, then we're going to do this too, and we're going to make great music. And because of that, we have Bernstein 60 years, 70 years later doing this in West Side Story. We have other people, we have Stravinsky doing it in, maybe 15, 20 years doing it. We have a lot of people that we've talked to that are doing these things, but he's really the first to say, I'm going to do this in the opening of my piece, and this is my contribution to the 20th century. It's kind of like Back to the Future, like one little event that changes the whole course, with Marty McFly and Doc Brown. It's I'm dramatizing it a little bit, but I think that's true. And this is how 20th century music starts, and this is what we still use. So very cool. So we'll think about that. Okay, that's Debussy. He wrote super relaxing music, but his private life was filled with a lot of stress. I mean, he had a lot of high profile affairs, and he broke off engagements a lot and left his wife, and was, I think, just wrote really pretty music, but I think his life was very hectic. And like I said, influenced many people, including Bill Evans, that we did a whole class on. But Debussy died of cancer at his home, 55, after composing for about 30 years or so. So had a long, good life of composing, and left a huge mark. So Claude Debussy, brilliant, genius composer, and very cool. So think about this. What about this? You didn't think I was going to give you something to think about. What's one thing we could change now that changes the rest of our history, or the rest of our day? If he changed one note, it should have gone here, but it went here. Think of what could we do? Well, I should do this, but what if I did that? And that would inspire other people. What do you think about that? Are you liking that? I kind of wasn't sure if I should do a little lesson thing, but I'm gonna do that. You don't have to do that, but I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do what's something slightly different that could make somebody's day, make them happy, make them think differently, make them do all these different things. That's what Debussy did with a note. So even if you're not a composer, you can still do it with your work, or with how you respond to somebody, or how you say something. Change one little thing. Doesn't have to recreate everything. He didn't do anything. He just went one interval below what he was supposed to. So let's do that. Let's go one interval down and see if it creates a different path. What if he never did use that interval? What if he never did go down? Music would be different forever. Possibly, we would never know. But it's weird how one idea, one note just altered a little bit can make you think of something completely different, can reinvent your whole life almost. I'm very excited about this. I like it. Okay. Said it all, definitely, no doubt. And I'm going to say more tomorrow. We have, I have a fun class for us tomorrow. It's going to be very fun. And then Jurassic Park on Friday. Okay, love you, miss you, see you soon. Bye.